The first night we heard the scratching, I thought it was a rat. A big one, maybe, trapped in the ceiling crawlspace, dragging thin claws against the old wood of our house in Cedar Falls. My wife Anna, lying beside me in bed, froze. The sound came from above, from the attic we never used, a dark, stuffy space full of the previous owner's junk and our own unopened boxes. It was a dry, insistent noise, like something trying to claw its way down. It lasted a few minutes and stopped as abruptly as it began, leaving a silence heavier, more charged than before. Anna gripped my arm, her nails digging slightly into my skin, and whispered, her voice trying for rationality but failing miserably, that we should call an exterminator. I agreed, but a cold shiver, impossible to ignore, ran down my spine. Rat, I thought again, trying to convince myself. Had to be a rat. The following days brought a false calm. The exterminator, a practical man named Robert, inspected the attic, laid down poison and traps, and assured us any rodent colony would be gone soon. We paid, thanked him, and tried to resume normalcy. Our son Luke, only 8 years old, seemed to have forgotten the incident, absorbed in his drawings and playing in the sunny backyard. Anna returned to her teaching job, and I to my spreadsheets in the home office. The house, a solid 1970s build with a front yard and a backyard, felt like a refuge again. The peace lasted less than a week. It was on a Tuesday, late at night, that the sounds evolved. They were no longer just isolated scratches. They were footsteps. Dragging, cautious footsteps, but unmistakably footsteps, echoing in the void between our bedroom ceiling and the attic floorboards. They seemed to come from one corner, then another, as if whatever it was patrolling the perimeter of its dark domain. Anna and I sat up in bed, motionless, listening. Her breathing was quick and shallow. My own throat was dry. Luke, in the next room, slept soundly, oblivious. The dragging stopped, replaced by a new sound, one that froze the blood in my veins. Whispers. They weren't discernible words, just a low, guttural murmur, like the rustle of dry leaves dragged by wind, but with an almost human cadence, a sinister intent behind the noise. It came not only from above, but seemed to emanate from the very walls of the hallway, as if the house itself was breathing dark secrets. From that moment, the house ceased to be ours. It became occupied territory. Every nocturnal sound, the natural creak of wood, the groan of a door, the wind rattling a poorly sealed window, was a potential threat. Anna developed a nervous tic, unconsciously pulling a strand of hair while reading or watching TV, her eyes constantly scanning the ceiling corners. Luke, once carefree, began having nightmares, waking up screaming about the man in the shadows who wanted to play with him in the dark. He refused to enter any room alone without light, and the bathroom, down the dark hallway, became a source of panic. Me, always the rational one, the provider, tried to maintain an appearance of control. I checked the attic again, my hands sweating as I pushed up the retractable ladder, my flashlight cutting through the thick darkness like a knife. The air was heavy, saturated with the acrid smell of ancient dust, mold, and something else, something indefinably rancid, organic. The exterminator's traps were untouched, no sign of any rat. But the dust on the floorboards, the dust showed marks. Not clear footprints, but dragged grooves, as if someone had moved on their knees or with bare, dirty feet, and dark, irregular stains that resembled dried droplets of something I didn't want to identify. An old rocking chair, covered by a sheet, was positioned differently, facing not the center of the attic, but directly towards the ladder opening, as if someone had sat there to observe. The investigation, fueled by a fear bordering on panic, expanded. The sounds were no longer confined to the attic. Sometimes, they came clearly from the basement, a damp concrete cubbyhole where we stored garden tools and old canning jars. Other times, they seemed to echo inside the living room walls, especially behind the large wooden cabinet where Anna stored winter clothes. One afternoon, while Luke played in the backyard and Anna graded papers on the sofa, I heard a distinct scratching, metallic, coming from the wall behind her. It was the sound of nails, or something very like them, scraping against metal piping or the masonry itself. Anna heard it too. Her face drained of all color, and she stood up so fast her papers flew to the floor. The atmosphere became oppressive, a constant fog of fear. Windows were locked before sunset, curtains drawn early, turning the house into an artificially lit fortress. We bought extra locks for the interior doors, a ridiculous measure that made us feel slightly less powerless. We discussed calling the police, but what would we say? That we heard footsteps in the attic? Whispers in the walls. They'd laugh at us, or worse, think us crazy. We hired a handyman, a quiet man named Joseph, to open a small section of the living room wall where the sounds were most frequent. He found only standard structure, bricks, old water pipes, coated electrical wiring. No burrows, no nests. He left scratching his head, muttering something about old houses, strange noises. But the look he gave me was one of caution, almost pity. The truth, the horrifying truth, revealed itself not through active searching, but through the creature's mistake, or perhaps a moment of deliberate carelessness, a perverse desire to be seen. It was on a night of heavy rain, the sound of water drumming on the roof almost drowning out the usual whispers and scratches. I woke with an urgent need to use the bathroom. The hallway was dark, only a sliver of moonlight filtered through the clouds from the back window. As I passed the attic door, set into the hallway ceiling, something made me stop. The small metal pull-cord handle was slightly lowered. It wasn't latched in place like we always left it. An inch, maybe less, of darkness blacker than the surrounding night was visible in the gap. The impulse was irrational, driven by months of accumulated terror and a sudden, boiling rage. I didn't grab the flashlight. I climbed silently onto the nearby step stool used for changing light bulbs, my trembling hands finding the cold metal handle. With a sharp tug, I released the latch and pulled the hatch down, the ladder unfolding with a high-pitched screech that echoed in the silent house. The smell that descended was overwhelming. A mix of clogged chemical toilet, meat rotting in the sun, and the deepest mold imaginable. But it was what I saw, or rather what I didn't fully see, that paralyzed me there on the stool, unable to breathe. In the absolute darkness of the attic, 2 points of light reflected the faint hallway glow. They weren't animal eyes. They were too large, too far apart, and had a liquid, inhuman quality. They didn't shine, they just captured the scant light, hovering in the void like patches of oil floating on black water. For an instant that lasted an eternity, we stayed like that, me staring at those 2 patches of conscious darkness, and them staring back. Then, slowly, with a movement that caused a faint rustle of something dry and brittle, the creature shifted backwards, merging even deeper with the shadows of the rafters and stacked boxes. But not before I perceived the vague, inhuman outline. A crouched silhouette, limbs too long and thin, bent at wrong angles. A head too large, disproportionate, and a skin, or what covered its body, that seemed less a surface and more a layer of coagulated shadow, of dust accumulated over decades. I climbed down from the stool like an automaton, my legs weak, my insides turned to water. I pushed the ladder up forcefully, the thud of the hatch closing sounding like a gunshot in the night. I latched the mechanism with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. Anna was at our bedroom door, her face a mask of silent terror. She had seen my expression. I didn't need to say a word. Now we know. It's not a rat. It's not a human intruder. It's something that lives here. That has always lived here, hidden in the guts of this house long before we bought it in Mill Creek and moved in. It lives in the hidden spaces, the gaps, the voids. It watches. It waits. The scratches are its nails scraping wood as it moves. The footsteps are its limbs dragging across the dusty floor. The whispers are its voice, or what it uses for a voice, perhaps talking to itself, perhaps commenting on us, our habits, our growing fear. It has been here during family dinners, during Luke's laughter, during intimate moments between Anna and me. It has seen everything. It knows our routines, our weaknesses, our deepest fears we don't even admit to ourselves. The basement, the attic, the walls, they aren't just parts of the house. They are its territory, its hunting ground. The atmosphere now is unbearable. The air weighs like lead, charged with the certainty of that sinister presence. Every sound, every silence, is torture. Luke no longer plays alone in the backyard. Anna jumps at the slightest noise. I find myself staring at the ceiling, at the walls, wondering where it is now, what it's seeing, what it's planning. What is it waiting for? Hunger, company, something much, much worse. The house whispers to us now, not just at night, but during the day too. It's a constant whisper, a background score of horror permeating every room. And worse than the whispers is the silence that follows them. Because in the silence, we know it's there. Listening, watching, waiting. The moment its waiting finally ends. The moment it decides to come down from the attic, emerge from the basement, step out from the walls, no longer a sound, but a physical, inescapable presence in our living room, our bedroom, our son's room. It has waited years. What are a few more days, hours, minutes, to a patient creature that has made our house its world? The terror is no longer what we hear. The terror is what we know is about to happen. The attic door seems more fragile with each passing day. The walls seem to breathe. And the silence, that heavy silence that comes after the whispers, it screams. It screams that its time is almost up, and that ours is too. The package arrived on a Tuesday choked with gray, the kind of day drained of color. The mailman, a sour-faced man named Robert, handed over the battered wooden box with an expression bordering on disgust, as if the object inside emitted a bad smell only he could detect. "Inheritance from your Uncle Gerald, up near Mill Creek," he said, too quickly, shoving the box into my hands before practically scurrying away. The weight was unexpected, dense, like holding a lump of wet clay. My wife Emily, ever practical, suggested we open it at the kitchen table, but something, a cold finger tracing my spine as I touched the rough wood, made me carry the box up to the attic, that dusty, forgotten corner of our house in Cedar Falls. Uncle Gerald. I barely knew him. A cranky hermit who lived out in the sticks near Mill Creek, a figure from murky family legends mentioned in whispers during Christmas gatherings. They said he collected strange things, that his property, handed down for generations, had a stained past. Died alone, childless, and now, apparently, I was next in line. The last blood heir left, the lawyer had stated dryly over the phone. The box had no lock, just a rusted metal clasp that groaned in protest when I pried it open with an old screwdriver. Inside, swathed in rough, almost shroud-like cotton cloth, lay a pocket watch. It wasn't handsome. It was large, heavy, made of tarnished, dark brass, etched around the face not with numbers, but with spirals and geometric shapes that hurt the eyes if stared at too long. At its center, where hand should have been, was only a single thin, black needle, fixed unwaveringly on a mark resembling a stylized drop of blood. It didn't tick. It was pure silence, but an active silence, watchful. I picked up the watch. That was the mistake. The cold of the metal pierced my skin like an ice needle, shooting up my arm. And then I didn't see, but felt an image bloom behind my eyes, clear as my own memory, a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, maybe from the last century, kneeling on a packed dirt floor inside a dark barn. He held a curved, wickedly sharp knife. Before him, bound, a young woman wept silently, her wide eyes filled with terror piercing the gloom. The man, whose face held a disturbing familiarity, raised the knife. There was a flash of metal in the weak lantern light, and then darkness. But not before I heard, not with my ears but within my skull, the wet, terrible sound of the blade meeting flesh, and a muffled scream ending in a gurgle. The smell of blood, iron, and damp earth flooded my nostrils, so real I choked. I dropped the watch like it was white hot. It landed on the cloth, inert. I was drenched in cold sweat, shaking, my hands tingling. Emily found me minutes later, slumped against the attic wall, pale as plaster. "David, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, her face a mask of genuine concern. How to explain? I blamed dizziness, the stuffy attic air. But the coppery smell of blood still clung to the back of my throat. The visions didn't stop. They became regular visitors, brutal intruders in my mind. Every time I touched the watch, or even got too close to the box, they were projected into my consciousness. Always different, yet horrifyingly consistent in theme: sacrifice. Men, women, even children, from various eras, but always with that familiar cast to the executioners' faces, my ancestors. Always in a similar place, perhaps the old Gerald property. Always with that curved knife, the same muffled scream, the same sickly sweet, metallic stench. The scenes were brief but intense, leaving persistent nausea and a deep, primal fear. I started avoiding the attic. The mere thought of the watch sent chills through me. But the curse, I soon learned, wasn't content to be ignored. Strange things began to happen. Small things at first. The smell of blood and damp earth would appear in empty rooms, unexplained. I found muddy footprints on the upstairs hallway carpet, leading towards the attic door, footprints that vanished halfway. At night, whispers drifted down from the roof space, hoarse voices murmuring words in an unrecognizable language that carried an obscene intent. My little girl, Sophie, started waking up screaming, saying the sad man with the shiny knife was in the corner of her room. Emily, initially skeptical, grew alarmed by Sophie's state and my constant pallor, my increasing irritability. Fear was eating at us, creating invisible cracks. Research was a descent into hell. Dusty letters from Uncle Gerald, found in a forgotten trunk, spoke of the family duty, of appeasing the hungry land. Old church records from Mill Creek mentioned unexplained disappearances near the family property generations back. I found a journal from a great-great-grandfather, Henry, its pages stained with a dark liquid I didn't want to identify. He wrote about the watch, calling it the marker, about the agony of fulfilling the obligation, about the eyes watching him from the shadows, the same eyes I was starting to feel in my own home, in dark corners, when silence fell. The curse was real, a blood debt, to keep something at bay, something ancient and hungry that lived in the land of the property. A human sacrifice was demanded every generation. The watch, the marker, was the trigger, the reminder, and the instrument that chose the next executor through the visions that were now mine. The pressure built like a thunderhead. The visions became more frequent, more vivid, even without touching the watch. I saw the murder scenes when I closed my eyes to sleep. I woke with the taste of copper in my mouth. Shadows in the house stretched unnaturally, gaining humanoid outlines. The whispers became clear voices, hissing my name: "David, your turn. Fulfill the duty, blood for blood." I felt a physical presence, oppressive, following me through rooms, a cold that came from within. The watch, left in the attic, began appearing elsewhere in the house, on my nightstand, on the car seat, once lying open on Sophie's blanket as she slept, its black needle pointing at the blood drop. It was a warning, an ultimatum. The breaking point was Sophie. She fell suddenly ill, a high, inexplicable fever the doctors couldn't diagnose. Her small body burned, and in her delirium, she didn't speak of the sad man, but of the lord of the land, who wanted a drink. Emily was frantic, spending sleepless nights by her bedside. I knew with an icy certainty that filled me with unspeakable dread. The curse wouldn't wait any longer. It was choosing the sacrifice for me. And Sophie, my Sophie, was the perfect target. The youngest blood, the purest, to sate the hunger of the thing in the earth. The night Sophie's fever peaked was the worst. The wind howled like a banshee, battering the windows. The lights flickered, threatening to die. The whispers were a constant, deafening chorus inside my head. Blood needs blood, the price, pay the price. And then came the clearest vision yet. Not of the past, of the present. I saw myself. I was at the old Gerald property near Mill Creek, inside that same dark barn from the ancestral visions. In my hand, the curved knife, cold and heavy. Before me, not a stranger, but Sophie bound, her eyes, so like her mother's, wide with a terror that tore my soul. Her scream, as the vision of the knife rose, echoed inside my skull, too real. That's when I found it, buried under a pile of papers in the attic. One final letter from Uncle Gerald, written in a shaky hand, perhaps days before his death. It wasn't an explanation, it was a desperate confession. The curse lies, David, it said. The land doesn't just want blood. It wants the right blood. The blood of the last direct heir who received the marker. The sacrifice isn't for you to perform. It is you. Relief was a short, violent wave, followed immediately by a deeper, absolute terror. Sophie wasn't the target. I was. The marker hadn't chosen me to be the executioner this generation. It had marked me to be the victim. The final sacrifice needed to break the cycle, or just the next payment on the eternal debt. The letter didn't say. But the relief of knowing Sophie was safe was obliterated by the ice spreading through my chest. I looked at the watch, which was now sitting on a box near the attic stairs, as if it had always been there. The black needle trembled faintly, pointing inexorably at the blood drop. The whispers merged into a single command, hissing and inescapable. Go. Go to the land. Accept. The presence around me materialized into a burning cold, an invisible force pushing me forward, towards the stairs, out of the house. I knew I couldn't run. The curse was inside me now, as much a part of me as the blood in my veins. The marker was calling. The place of sacrifice awaited. The property near Mill Creek. The dark barn. And the curved knife, which I knew, with a certainty that sickened me, would already be there, waiting. Not for my hand. For the hand of whatever demanded the final payment. The true horror wasn't death, I realized, as my feet carried me towards the car against my conscious will. The true horror was knowing that, in the end, I wouldn't be the author, but just another piece in the bloody ritual, the prepared victim, the sacrifice that would either seal or break a chain of horror stretching back centuries before my birth. And the only thing more terrifying than going was knowing that any other choice would condemn Emily and Sophie to a fate worse than death. The marker sat silently in my pocket, a dead, cold weight. Its silence was now the most terrifying sound in the world. The first thing I saw in the clearing wasn't the poisonous mushrooms we were hunting, nor the glowing stones that lured my sister Laura into these cursed woods near Pine Ridge. It was the eye. A human eye, viscous and bluish, balanced atop a mushroom like a grotesque offering. My scream choked in my throat as I spotted the others, arranged in a perfect circle, each resting on a different fungal cap. Laura, ever the fearless botanist, froze beside me, her flashlight trembling and illuminating the scene like a nightmare we couldn't wake from. We'd come to this mountainous region of Oregon seeking rare species. Me, Mark, the older, skeptical brother, Laura, the scientist obsessed with nature, and Theo, our photographer friend who saw beauty in everything, even in those gouged-out eyes. He raised his camera, professional instinct stronger than horror, but Laura grabbed his arm with panicked strength. It wasn't just what we saw, it was what we felt. The air weighed down like soaked cotton, smelling of damp earth and something deeper, rancid, like meat forgotten in the sun. An unnatural silence swallowed the forest's night sounds, as if even the insects cowered in fear. Laura's flashlight flickered out for an instant, plunging us into absolute darkness, and when the light returned, the eyes were gone. In their place, only circular impressions in the wet soil, as if something heavy and damp had been dragged away. We retreated to the rented cabin in the nearby hamlet of Black Creek, trying to convince ourselves it was a shared hallucination, maybe swamp gas. But the smell pursued us. It saturated our clothes, our hair. Laura, normally pragmatic, began locking every door and window at dusk, her pale face lit only by her laptop screen as she obsessively researched local legends. She found references to the Keepers of the Sleeping Earth, a cult supposedly vanished decades ago. They spoke of rituals under the full moon, sacrifices to appease an ancient entity called only that which waits below. Theo, trying to lighten the tension, suggested they were just stories to scare tourists, but his voice sounded hollow, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. The second night brought the chanting. Drifting from the forest, a guttural, dissonant drone that penetrated the cabin's wooden walls. They weren't recognizable words, but jagged syllables that seemed to scrape the inside of my skull. We stepped onto the porch, seeing only thick darkness beyond the circle of the exterior light. Laura pointed to the ground. Footprints. Not human. Wide, deep tracks, as if made by something dragging immense weight, mixed with smaller barefoot marks that ended abruptly at the tree line. Theo raised his camera again, flash firing blindly into the gloom. For a split second, the light froze pale, gaunt figures among the trees, faces indistinct but with eyes reflecting the light like nocturnal animals. Then, the flashbulb blew, the porch light fizzed and died, plunging us into darkness and the chorus of that chanting, now louder, closer, almost jubilant. It was Laura who found the symbols. The next morning, while I inspected the damage to the garden fence, something ripped apart with brute force, she yelled from the bathroom. Dark red marks, like dried blood, scrawled on the fogged mirror. An inverted triangle with an eye in the center, the same symbol found in the old records about the cult. It wasn't paint. It smelled of iron and decay. Theo, the cynic, examined the marks with a look of genuine terror I'd never seen on him. "They know we're here," he rasped, his voice raw. "They've marked the place." We decided to flee that morning. We packed in a frenzy, hands shaking, ears straining for the slightest sound from the woods that now seemed to breathe against the cabin. The car, an old SUV, refused to start. The battery was dead, the terminals corroded by a greenish, acidic slime that hadn't been there the night before. While I tried in vain to hook up jumper cables, Theo vanished. We found his camera on the ground near the forest edge, the lens shattered, the viewfinder displaying a blurred, shaky photo, the last he'd taken, showing indistinct pale shapes emerging from the darkness beneath the trees. His scream echoed then, a high, piercing sound abruptly cut off by a wet, crunching snap, followed by a silence more terrifying than any noise. We ran. Laura and I, desperate, plunged into the woods, directionless, just away from the cabin, away from where Theo had met his end. The air was icy, the muddy ground sucking at our feet. The chanting started again, not from a distance, but all around us, coming from every direction, hissing words that now seemed to form a name: Laura, Mark, like a perverse summons. Shapes moved between the trees, always in the corner of vision, tall and ungainly, moving with unnatural agility. Laura stumbled, fell, and when I helped her up, her leg was tangled in something viscous and dark that looked like vine, but pulsed faintly, like an exposed vein. We tore her free, leaving shreds of her torn pants on the thing that retracted into the shadows with a wet, sucking sound. We found the clearing again. Not by accident. They herded us there. The full moon, previously hidden by clouds, tore through the veil of fine rain, bathing the place in ghostly light. At the center rose a crude structure of twisted branches and bones bound with vines, resembling a deformed portal. Around it, figures draped in filthy robes, hoods shadowing their faces, moved in a slow, hypnotic circle. Their chanting was a guttural roar now, a physical force that made the air vibrate. And before the portal, bound to a post stained with black and red substances, was Theo. Not dead. Not yet. His eyes, wide with insane terror, found ours. His mouth moved in a silent scream, but the sound that came out was a bloody gurgle. Then we turned. They were behind us. They weren't human. Beneath the hoods, elongated faces, noseless. Just two breathing slits above mouths filled with small, needle-sharp teeth. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, revealing dark blue veins that pulsed. Their eyes, black as bottomless pits, reflected the moon and our image, small and desperate. The tallest one, with twisted bone horns lashed to its head, raised a dagger made of black, gleaming stone. Not towards Theo, but towards us. The chanting reached a deafening crescendo, filling the world, crushing our thoughts. Laura grabbed my hand, her nails digging into my skin, her body shaking violently. There was no escape. The figures closed in, their robes whispering against the damp earth with a rustle like dry skin, the smell of blood and rotten earth becoming a solid wall. The black dagger gleamed under the moon, its tip pointing first at me, then at Laura, as if choosing. The black eyes of the lead creature showed no hatred, no anger. They showed only an ancient hunger, a hunger that existed before these mountains rose, a hunger now fixed on us. The circle tightened, their chants forming a single word, repeated like a hammer on the anvil of our skulls. Offer, offer, offer. I knew, with an icy certainty that erased all fear, leaving only a terrified void, that we were no longer tourists, no longer curious. We were the next meal for the thing they called a god. We were the sacrifice that would seal the night, and the first ray of sun beginning to tear at the horizon brought not hope, but the harsh light to illuminate the end approaching, slow, inevitable, and hungry.